with regard to the Israelis, right? Israel is a rogue state, and it has us tied around its finger, and it can go off and do all sorts of things, and it knows that it can depend on us to bail them out.
So recently, John Mearsheimer talked a little bit about the extent to which Israel is drawing the U.S. into war with Iran. It's only a matter of to what degree that has happened and why Israel's able to get away with this and how it's angling and working President Trump at this point. So let's watch, let's react, like the video, and subscribe to the channel.
I don't want to give you heartburn, but probably the most pro-Israeli, pro-war, never met a war he didn't want somebody else to fight, member of the United States Senate from South Carolina.
Yeah.
Thinks this is a game.
Yeah, he does. He always does.
On his own account. Game on. Pray for Israel. I don't even know how to analyze the human mind that would say something like that by calling it game on. This is a massive, unprovoked, illegal war crime attack on a sovereign nation, which the United States duped into a false sense of security by pretending to negotiate it with it. I think we are as culpable as the Israelis are, but that culpability is not going to be redressed on the battlefield.
Well, the fact that somebody like Lindsey Graham gets such a prominent platform inside of the United States tells you how much trouble we're in.
Right.
But just to take it a step further, it is important to understand that he's just one of many senators and congressmen who are backing Israel to the hilt and will back Israel to the hilt no matter what it does. He just happens to be more vociferous and more foolish in his public performances than the others. But he's just one of many. And as I've said many times, it just goes to show you the extent to which Israel and the lobby here in the United States basically owns Congress.
That's so true. He is verbose. He is vociferous, as Mearsheimer said. You know, there's so many people that agree with Lindsey Graham, but just, you know, have the wherewithal to not say the most absurd things in the middle of people dying. Game on. He's never known a war that he doesn't love. A predominant neocon in an era of neocons. Lindsey Graham's one of the worst of the worst. But Judge said something there I want to talk about briefly too, is that this truly was an unprovoked attack too. I mean, we hear the term unprovoked to mean like Putin's invasion of Russia. That's what the corporate media goes with. They mean to truncate all the antecedents and begin history the day before yesterday. Obviously, that was not unprovoked. It came after waves and waves of NATO expansion and arming Ukraine to the teeth, you know, flirting with putting them in your military alliance, NATO. But this was truly unprovoked. Oh, and by the way, overthrowing the Yanukovych government in 2014. But this truly was unprovoked. Israel launched an immediate strike. Now, you'll never hear Iran has the right to defend itself in major mainstream corporate media. But all you hear still is that Israel has the right to defend itself, even after it launched the strike. And, yeah, this Lindsey Graham is a monster, and there's no other way to say it.
Right, right. Do we know the nature of the damage caused? The BBC described it as unprecedented damage on Iran's elite. I think they're referring to the attacks in a suburban neighborhood where many of the generals and Revolutionary Guard senior officials resided, and they're dead.
I believe that when all is said and done, the most successful part of the Israeli attack will be the decapitation. I mean, they actually were able to kill a significant number of Iranian leaders, mainly generals, and they were also able to kill a handful of nuclear scientists. But the question you have to ask yourself is whether this decapitation strategy will work. And the fact is that there are people in the second echelon, the third echelon, who will be moved up to replace those individuals. And I'm sure that in some cases, the second and third echelon people who are moved up will be more competent than the people they replace. In some cases, they won't. But the idea that this is a paralyzing attack that will make it impossible for Iran to wage a protracted war against Israel is, in my opinion, wrong. I think the decapitation strategy worked in the sense that lots of people in Iran at the top were killed. But beyond that, I don't think it's going to have much effect on the war.
Yeah, I have to agree there. It also killed other people in that residential area that they bombed, which included some of the top brass in the military. But he's right. Within regimes and during regime change operations, we often see that those that are elevated in the political vacuum that subsumes a country like this don't always pan out to be, beneficial in the long run, or sometimes are more beneficial to that regime. So we'll have to see how this plays out, but certainly it was a decapitation strike, and Iran has been able to fire back. So it's not like they've been able to dismantle the military capabilities of the country by taking out some of these generals.
And we don't know of Iran's capability to respond or to retaliate in a massive way because we don't know how much damage the Israeli assault caused.
No, I think that's wrong. I think they still have the capability to respond in a massive way. I don't think that the Israelis destroyed so much of their missile inventory that the Iranians can't pound Israel and pound American bases in the Middle East and oil installations in the Gulf. They can do that. I think there was some damage done for sure. How much we can't tell. But I don't think massive damage was done. And by the way, one thing we haven't talked about and few people are talking about is what happens if this war goes on and the Israelis hit oil installations inside of Iran, and the Iranians retaliate by hitting oil installations in the Middle East more generally. Shut down the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. This will have catastrophic.
Well, we'll have $10.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. He's right. And in fact, the Iranian regime has promised to target and hit U.S. soldiers in the region if the U.S. is found to be culpable in any of these strikes, which, it's a matter of perspective of whether they are. If you're giving Israel the technology, the weaponry, the resources, the intelligence to do these strikes, we better hope that the Iranian regime is feeling charitable right then. Of course, they're in a precarious situation too because they don't want to provoke the full wrath of the U.S. So, it's going to be tough to see what happens. They can shut down oil productivity and shipping to some extent. Same with Israel. The Strait of Hormuz is where, tons of the world's productive natural gas and oil flows through. So we'll see if that has to be a factor in all this too. Just a disaster for the U.S. Certainly a fatality for the America First mentality, the true America First mentality, not faux America First, which means Israel first, and maybe my own community somewhere after that in the priorities list.
Or a gallon gasoline in the United States. Thank you, Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, you want to say thank you, Israel.
Right. Well, Israel would be nothing without him. Is it fair to say the neocons are now triumphant? I mean, what became of the realists? What became of the American firsters, the Vice President Vance group that was on that telegram or signal call, whatever it was, that supposedly was arguing for restraint? They certainly didn't prevail here.
Well, there's no question they're triumphant at the moment, but you want to remember how triumphant everybody was when we went into Iraq. The first day, first week,
mission accomplished.
It looks terrific. But then once the cold douche reality hits, it doesn't look so good. And I don't think you can tell a good story about how Israel ends up with a happy ending here. I think that this one will not work out over the long term. So all the triumphalism that you see today, I believe, will melt away like snow on a May day. But just a
Well said. I do think that this is probably the greatest neocon triumph since the coup in Libya that overthrew Gaddafi, for sure. And now there's open slave markets there, after the fact, by the way. That was absurd. But it's so frustrating to see supposedly the death. Like, the optics were that the neocons have died. The neocons have gone. Some of them have aligned with Biden. The Bill Cristols of the world singing Biden's praises in the last administration and, condemning Trump. But still, despite all that, Trump seems to have been influenced immensely by the same neocons that he raked over the coals during the campaign season. Remember when he said that, Liz Cheney would know a little bit more about the destructive natures of war if she was sent to the front lines to fight them herself? Well, he's taking advice from the Liz Cheney archetypes at this point by aligning so closely with this in Israel strikes against Iran. And you can say he's not. His own verbiage, tries to tread that line where, this was done and the Iranians still have a chance to negotiate, but tons of Iranians are dead and they're going to be more dead if they continue. It's just crazy. This is textbook neocon foreign policy. The Israelis want to drag the U.S. into it. The U.S. is already involved into it, even though optics-wise the Trump administration is trying to make it sound like he's not. But he is, and they will be more involved if any harm comes to American soldiers, whether through a false flag or not. That's the biggest fear everyone should have right now, is a false flag. That a force that's not Iranian attacks U.S. troops and blames it on Iran. So then the U.S. goes full-bore regime change. And yeah, Israel's the albatross around the neck of the U.S. It can't shake it. And the Israel lobby has immense power.
Quick point on what happened to the restrainers. What happened to the realist, so to speak. The fact is, when it comes to foreign policy in the Middle East, Israel owns us. And the restrainers in the end don't matter, because Israel can do pretty much anything it wants. This is a truly remarkable situation that most Americans can't understand. It's just unfathomable that a small country with a couple million people is able to get the United States to do its bidding, to get unconditional support from the United States. But that's where we're at. Israel can do almost anything. I mean, to put a positive spin on what Trump has done, he's in a straitjacket. He just doesn't have any choice. There's no way he can really contest the Israelis, because the lobby is so powerful that if he contested the Israelis in a meaningful way over Gaza or over Iran, they crucify the guy.
Yeah, I hate to say that's true, and masterfully said. Great comparison there, and it's a cynical view, but I hate to say it's probably a true view. It's a realist view, and Mearsheimer is the expert on the Israel lobby. He literally wrote the book on the subject. It's an excellent book, by the way. But even since he's written that book, more has come out about the power of the Israel lobby. The fact I bring up a lot is that Thomas Massie revealed that each and every congressman has an AIPAC guy assigned to them, except for Thomas Massie, and there might be a few others, but that really, dictate to them how to vote, hold them accountable, and that's one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington. It's a foreign-based lobby. Now, JFK actually wanted to shut down the precursor to AIPAC. It was called the AZS, the American Zionist Council. Not shut it down, but he wanted them to register as a foreign lobby, and then they wouldn't be able to have the power they have and persuasive ability over U.S. congressmen. And then he was killed shortly thereafter. So, since then, the Israel lobby hasn't really taken any severe blows and has only grown in power.
Here's Colonel McGregor a few minutes ago. June turned out to be Iran's Pearl Harbor. Iran will now react as we did in 1942 when we were caught napping. What was limited to the region between Israel and Iran will now become regional. Trump's statements after the fact are an admission of his own level of complicity.
Hard to disagree with that.
Right.
As I said before, with regard to Scott's comments earlier this morning, I thought the use of the term Pearl Harbor was appropriate here. And furthermore, as I said, if you look at the scale of these attacks against Iran, it's really quite extensive. these attacks are quite extensive, and they're supposed to go on for days, if not weeks. And I think the end result is you're going to get a major war here. It's people who are talking about let's put a damper on this, let's put an end to this. I mean, I think this is delusional. The Iranians simply have to respond, and they have to respond in a massive way. And the Israelis will retaliate, and then we're off to the races.
Yeah, that's so true. They've already started to retaliate, but it's not clear how fierce their retaliation will be, because it seems like what they've fired so far, from reports I've read, is older stockpiles of ballistic missiles. And we'll have to see, once they deplete their more modern ones, the extent of damage that they can cause from Israel. Look, I'm not on any side of this conflict. I want people not to die. I just want the U.S. out of it. I've been more critical on Israel than others because it's not like Iran is waging war against its enemies in any regard, although that's all that Israel does. And yeah, the Palestinians are their enemies. They want to wash them out of Gaza, increase their West Bank settlements, and they've invaded Lebanon at least 3 times in the last, 50 years. In 2006 and 82 and in the 70s, they even developed a doctrine for targeting civilians called the Dahiya Doctrine. The mentality behind it, and this is not a conspiracy, you can read about this documented, is that if they kill enough civilians, the civilians in Lebanon would rise up and overthrow their government. That was their mentality. It didn't work there, but then they applied that to Gaza, and now they want regime change in Iran. So the U.S. is getting dragged into this, and don't get me wrong, lots of neocons in the U.S. are happy to do it. They were happy to invade Iraq too, like Netanyahu wanted to happen. They were happy to help to overthrow Assad in Operation Timber Sycamore. Didn't ultimately happen until last year. They finally got that one, but they dumped $15 billion into that, a CIA program financed through U.S. aid. So, this is just horrific. If the U.S. gets sucked into this, it's just disastrous. It's another theater of war. We're already rattling sabers with a nuclear power in Russia, escalating that war, cheering on the drone strike from Ukraine against the nuclear bombers last week. And it looks like both of these wars are not going the way of peace. They're both being escalated. And Trump was elected by many people to end the war in Ukraine, keep us out of war with Iran. But the neocons have prevailed, at least for the moment. Mearsheimer could be right about this triumph could be short. This is going to be a serious war, and probably a disastrous one in many regards. But those who think that Iran is going to be simply replaced by a liberal democracy might have a repeat of what happened in '53, and then you'll see the reaction to the neo-Shah, the new Shah that was overthrown like Pahlavi was.
We have 90,000 American troops. According to Ritter, the vast majority of them are support personnel, not frontline infantry, who are almost in a semicircle in that area. What happens when some of them get killed?
Well, that will give us an incentive to get deeply involved in the war. This is what I was saying to you before. The Israelis have a vested interest in sucking us into the war, right? What they want to do is get Americans killed, because if Americans get killed, that guarantees that we come in. So
do you think Donald Trump understands that his buddy Bibi Netanyahu wants Americans to get killed?
I don't know exactly what he understands. He obviously has acknowledged that he's thrown his lot in with the Israelis. I mean,
yeah, this is such a critical point. The fact that this twisted incentive structure, this motivational system for Israel exists in the first place is just sick. That it would be good for the Israeli perspective for Americans to die. That's why so many people believe that there might be a false flag attack on the horizon, that the U.S. gets sucked in deeper. This is the biggest thing to apprehend right now. It's the biggest thing to fear and pray for it not to happen right now. It would be alarming for the U.S. to get drawn in so much more deeply than it already is.
He's with them now, right? We're joined at the hip, and we're going to get pulled in. This reminds me a lot of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Of the Bay of Pigs operation that President Kennedy was involved in April of 1961, shortly after he became president. The Bay of Pigs operation, if you look at it, was doomed from the start. There was no way it would work. And when you read about it, you wonder, what was the CIA thinking when they pushed JFK to launch the boats and to invade in the Bay of Pigs? Well, what was going on here is the CIA understood that we would be defeated in the Bay of Pigs operation. But their belief is that Kennedy would then have no choice but to double down, get deeply involved in Cuba, and then that was the way we would overthrow the Castro regime.
Yeah, this is so true. This is the red-pilled historical point I'm so glad he's making. That's exactly what happened, is that it wasn't that they thought this initial, launch of this attack would be successful. They thought JFK would have no choice then to go full bore and overthrow Castro's regime. Well, Israel wants the same thing for Iran right now. If, there's non-successes from the U.S. in terms of losing military forces, that will draw the U.S. in. So I'm so glad he's making this parallel.
Right. So, in other words, the CIA understood the initial attack would not achieve its goal. But the idea was that you sucked President Kennedy into a commitment to topple the regime in Cuba. And in this case, I don't believe the Israelis think that they can eliminate Iran's nuclear capability with these attacks. It just can't be done. And they understand full well, I'm sure, that they're going to enrage the Iranians, and the Iranians are going to attack Israel. But this is all good news, because the name of the game is to suck the Americans in, just as they wanted to suck JFK in with the Bay of Pigs operation. And Trump has played right into the Israelis' hands. And here we go.
And after the Bay of Pigs, JFK was so furious at the CIA, he said, "I'd like to smash them into 1,000 pieces." And then came November 22nd, 1963.
Well, there's no question that he wanted to get rid of the head of the CIA, Allen Dulles, and he did that very quickly. And he was thinking about reforming the CIA because he understood that it was a rogue actor.
Absolutely. And actually, we know a little bit more about the revelations from the recent release, the declassification of the JFK files, because Arthur Schlesinger wrote a long memo that a lot of it was redacted before this was finally released, a few months ago, that said that this was true, that the CIA was engaging in rogue foreign policy, not the foreign policy that Americans had elected them to perform, and that the CIA has influence in the State Department. So CIA agents were taking up employment in the State Department to carry water for it and to support its foreign policy, which was alien to the electorate and the president. So yeah, JFK was enraged at that and seemed to have been, entertaining the notion of trying to dismantle it, curtail its power immensely. He did away with Dulles, which was maybe his best act in office, because Dulles is truly one of the worst criminal tyrants that the U.S. has ever had in public service, if you ask me. He's the engineer of the regime change operations in Guatemala and Iran and the Bay of Pigs disaster.
But with regard to the Israelis, right? Israel is a rogue state, and it has us tied around its finger, and it can go off and do all sorts of things, and it knows that it can depend on us to bail them out.
Last question, Professor Mearsheimer. Do you see any military action coming from any other country in the region, notably Egypt or Turkey?
No, I think everybody's going to keep their heads down. The last thing they want to do is get involved in this fight. There's nobody that has the capability to take on the Israelis or the Americans. And I think that all around the region, people regret that this attack has taken place. They see no good coming from it, quite correctly, I would add, but they're not going to get involved in the fight.
Well, I don't blame Mearsheimer for having that opinion, but actually since the attacks occurred, and he didn't know this at the time of this interview, I don't believe, is that Syria actually did get involved on the side of Israel. Syria is lending aid and allowing, I believe, from strikes to take place from within Syria. This is the regime that took over, the ISIS regime. that the U.S. aligned with and once had ties with Al-Qaeda. But it didn't matter because all of their sins were forgiven the moment they had ties with Al-Qaeda, because the CIA wanted the overthrow of Assad's government. A lot of people think that the CIA essentially created ISIS for that purpose. And that might be the case. I haven't looked into that deeply. But Syria has joined the fight on the side of Israel. So this deepens the concern that this could grow into a regional war. What if Lebanon gets involved, or Jordan, or Egypt? Egypt's been at Israel's throat historically, though not recently. And this just really has catastrophic effects for the U.S. to even be involved. I say go back to the foreign policy of John Quincy Adams, where he said, when boasting about America's best merits is that we go not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. And that is such an important lesson to learn. It's what kept the U.S. out of these conflicts for essentially a century. I mean, there was the Spanish-American War, there was a Mexican-American War, but the U.S. thrived by not getting intervened overseas. At least, I guess those were mostly in North America, which was the logic behind them. But, you know, war is not always costly. It always ends in disaster, and especially regime change operations of the type that Netanyahu wants. So, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Will Israel succeed in dragging the U.S. completely into this war? I want to hear from you on that. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider becoming a YouTube member or Patreon patron. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.